Hi, so you're about to watch a different version of Black Folks, which I'm calling this a bridge moment because it's me and Tom Ellis, who is white. And as you may know, Tom Ellis has allowed me to use his page to amplify my Black Folks conversation. And after each of the episodes, he and I would have these great conversations about our takeaways. And I thought we should have that discussion on camera. So that's what this is. And starting next week, I'm going to release new episodes of Black Folks featuring guests like Cherie J. Davis and Coleman Domingo, Alex Newell. So you can watch them on my IGTV page at Brandon K. Good, on Tom Ellis's IGTV page at official Tom Ellis, or on my YouTube, youtube.com/Brandon K. Good. Now, without any further ado, here's my bridge moment conversation with Tom Ellis.
Hi, Tom. We're on
Hello.
your page, so like everyone knows.
Welcome to my own page, me.
It's a special episode of Black Folks with one black folk and one white folk.
Black
But
week, yeah.
but I feel like so Tom and I have been having a lot of conversations as the episodes have been coming out, and just kind of sharing some moments that stuck out for both of us. And I thought it could be great for us to do that on camera because I'm sure everyone watching is having their own set of moments. And so this is that thing that we talked about the first time, just like these conversations and when white people and black people come together for a bridge moment. So I feel like this will be like a little bit of a bridge moment. Yeah.
I love a bridge.
I love a bridge.
Love a bridge.
So like my framework for this, because I usually ask a question, but so I guess the question today would be like, what are some of your takeaways and learning moments? And we can kind of start wherever, like kind of like what's the first takeaway or aha moment or learning thing that you're like, oh, this thing really stuck with me.
Okay. Well, I have to say the first thing that like comes to me is awkwardness. White awkwardness.
Yeah,
Right?
okay.
Because the very nature of having these conversations, I've realized, it's like there's a lot of self-policing that starts to go on inside my own head. Like this is my own personal experience of this now I'm talking about, but I feel like it's probably a shared experience, is that it's like, I want to say the right thing. I want to like help. I want to like do, and it's like, we've got to get rid of this perception problem that we've all got.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be seen to be doing, I want to be seen to be listening, I want to be seen to be learning.
Oof, yes.
And it's like, forget that shit.
Yeah.
Just listen. And like, it's not a test. It's not a kind of like, where have you gone right and where have you gone wrong?
Yeah.
Like, I think ultimately, this is a moment about holding your hands up and saying, we've all gone wrong and we all need to listen, because the world wouldn't be in this state if everything had gone right.
Yes. Right.
So,
yes.
And then after listening, finding that place, the safe place that we're talking about to have the conversations, because I think that's really important. And then establishing, once you're in a safe place to have the conversation, being able to say what you're saying and not worrying about offense and all those things in the moment, because it's about, the offense has already happened. It's already happening, all around us. So it's like, forget that stuff now. Find a safe place, like talking about having someone to check in with.
The accountability partner, yeah.
The accountability program is like, I'm lucky I've got my wife and we check in with each other all the time. But I have other friends that, obviously I've been talking to a lot about this, and I've been talking to you a lot about it.
Yeah.
But I think the white people checking in with other white people and having accountability is super important right now.
Yes, having somebody that you can talk to this stuff about, having somebody that you're like, wait, what did you read this week? What did you listen to? Or we're watching this thing and what did I learn from that? Just so that you continue, the reprogramming and the retraining and the reconditioning doesn't happen overnight. And so the accountability partner, in my opinion, allows you to stay in the work. Because ally fatigue, and I've said this, allyship fatigue is complete bullshit. We haven't done anything for anyone to be tired about. Like no one's tired yet. But people are disengaging. And I think making the choice to have that accountability partner allows you to stay engaged, stay invested, have somebody to check in on you and you check in on them. So yeah, for sure.
This is an ongoing, it's very difficult when you've got a president in this country who gets bored of things. And once he gets bored, he just moves on. And you're like, we can't afford to get, We
He's
cannot.
bored and destructive.
He's bored and destructive. Exactly. It's like a kid with his Lego set who just, it looks a bit like a ship. Oh, break it.
Yeah, harmful.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then turn the TV on and watch Fox.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's an issue. It is an issue with white people, and it comes. I think one of the other things that, like, when you talk about what have I learned, the notion of white privilege, I've never really thought about what that means.
What does it mean to you now?
Well, it means to me now many things that I never thought about and I've never had to think about. Right?
Yeah.
Before, when someone said white privilege to me, I was always like, oh yeah, white people, well-moneyed. Like, because I, as a white man, have lived within a system of privilege as well. Like, you know, I remember being at school and, like, the kids that were wealthier than me had more things than me, being jealous of that.
Right.
That is a different type of privilege.
Yes.
And that's not what we're talking about. The privilege for me is even to have that feeling in the first instance.
Yes, that's your main focus, is like, I want to have money.
Yeah.
Not
yeah,
like
exactly.
my safety.
It's the safety thing. And I think, like, one of the things that I think was talked about from a few of the guests actually was the code switching.
Did you know about that before?
I mean, no. I mean, I've never thought about it. I can identify with the notion of changing the way you speak.
Sure.
And stuff to, like, impress upon people or make an impression upon people.
Yeah.
But I've never, like, it's all these things. I never thought them from a safety point of view.
Yeah.
I thought them from how I can get the best out of a situation point of view, not just simply just treat me normally.
Yeah. Yeah, like Kristen Griffith Vanderyacht, when we were talking about, both of our parents being Caribbean and our mothers being concerned about how we were articulating and, like, how we were having the universally sounding voice, which is part of that code switching world of, like, this is how I need you to sound so that you can not just, like, get what you want, but, like, be protected inside of white America, that you can talk your way out of things. Which, when I talked to DB and I told him that story about being followed in that store, it was like, that was my go-to move. That code switch was like,
the pencils.
Yes.
Excuse me, sir.
Excuse me, sir. Are there pencils here?
Give it to someone who doesn't deserve, like a security guard in a shop who's giving you grief because of the way you look.
Yeah.
You are giving him so much more respect than he's giving you.
Yeah.
That's so fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, when you're talking about these takeaways, those sort of things are the things that I've never thought about. And that is white privilege. The privilege of never having to think about those things.
Yeah. So then what do you do once you, I know we're going to talk about the show, but also I'm just so, I actually also haven't had this conversation. I think I've been talking to white people throughout these last 2 months, but I haven't, like, had this, like, sit down of, like, okay, it's been 2 months. What have you learned? What are you working through? And so I guess my question is, like, so now that you're like, I'm now aware of this white privilege, what is your instinct? Like, to, like, do you do something? Do you feel at like, how do you move differently with that knowledge?
Well, I've taken it upon myself to do a bit more learning and reading and watching of things, like all these kind of reading and watching lists that came out. These are what you can do. It's like, everyone's like, what can we do? What can we do? Well, panic.
Yes.
I need to be doing something.
White urgency.
I actually feel white urgency. Exactly. We've got to do it. We've got to do it now. Okay.
Yes.
That's it. That's our 4 weeks done.
Right. And now we're fatigued.
Exactly. Now I'm really tired. And I mean,
it's absurd, right? Like,
and you want me to wear a mask? I mean, for goodness sake. That again is white privilege. The mask thing is white privilege. That is
1,000%.
the epitome of white privilege.
Yes.
For me.
This does not belong to me. This does not affect me. It shouldn't affect me. I don't want to do it.
It's stepping on my rights as a person to do the things that I want to do. Well, hello, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
But there are a vast population in this world of people who have not had that privilege.
Yes.
And don't get that choice.
The being inconvenienced.
Yes, the inconvenience.
Yeah.
Inconvenient. People don't like to be inconvenienced. I've really learned that a lot recently. and
Yeah.
and I think there is a part of like the fatigue thing that you're talking about. It's like I'm fully aware that like there are probably people out there going, "Oh God, you're still talking about that,"
Yeah.
and that in itself is where I've changed.
Mm.
Because maybe the old Tom might have gone, "Yeah," but the new Tom will go, "Yeah, I am, and this is why I'm doing it."
Yes. That's a huge
Which
difference.
is a big difference.
That
And
is
it
a big
doesn't sound like a
difference.
big difference, but it's like I'm intrinsically quite a back foot person, right?
Mm.
You know, like
What
I
does a
think
back foot person mean? That means like
back
a
foot. Well, back foot is
competition?
like I'm not the aggressor in situations, so I'm
Okay.
kind of like I'm horribly diplomatic sometimes. To like and like my wife hates me for it sometimes, but it's like I always kind of like want to go. Let's take a step back and let's think
Mm.
about both sides. And like
Yes.
that is, but it also is incredibly passive.
Mm.
And it has a tendency to let things go, right?
Tom, that's a
Letting
huge.
letting things go is something that I've thought was actually quite a good attribute,
Yeah.
but actually in this case, and I guess it's the flip of like picking your battles, but like I no longer am comfortable being quiet, not just about that, but about other aspects of my life now as well, because I feel like it's not productive. No
Mm.
change happens when someone is passive.
Yeah. That's a huge revelation. I mean, like, I'm having like these aha moments talking to you right now about this stuff, just because
Yeah.
I've not, for me as a Black person, it's like, speak up, white people. Like, but I'm not considering, because I don't need to, and that's not my
Mhm.
position, but we're friends, the psyche of what's going on. And it's like, oh, that passive position is probably a lot of well-meaning white people. Like white people who are like, I don't identify as racist. If I saw something overt, I would absolutely stop it. But in general, I don't want to deal with the confrontation.
Yes.
And I think as a Black person, it's like you have no choice but to deal with the confrontation. And it's the white people around us that don't want to have the confrontation that actually don't make it better. Does that make sense? It's like,
It does make sense.
yeah, it's like, I
If it,
need you to be active in it.
exactly, exactly. And again, it goes back to white privilege. The white privilege is to kind of like be passive,
Yes.
right?
Yes. The luxury of being
Privilege that
passive.
it's the privilege that black people don't have because they're constantly, fighting from the moment they wake up in the morning to kind of be seen at the same level. Because for some
Yes.
reason, everyone's judged with their degree to whiteness. And that's another thing that I've learned from watching these things. It's like even within different cultures, there's still that going on.
Yeah.
Like some people are not like I think it was Alicia that said, she learned she wasn't black enough
Yes.
because
Yes.
she altered the way that she talked when she went to go and see her cousins down in New Orleans or down in
Yes.
Louisiana or something, and they said, you sounding
You
white. She was
sound white.
thinking,
Yes.
you sound white, and she was accused of not being black enough. So
Yes.
the kind of racism also exists within these kind of
Inside of the
inside of
communities. Yeah. I mean, like, which I don't know if we've talked, I've had that full conversation about colorism quite yet. But, as we like, I keep saying this, and other people have been saying this, like, this is like an onion, like, there are layers to this shit. And we're kind of like in the broad phase of like, please stop killing Black people and stop the violence. But as we go deeper in and we start talking about, equity and empowerment and protection, but also inside of Black communities, talking about how much of our culture or how much of how we interact with one another is through a white supremacist lens, right? Like how much of it is us and like this is how we want things to be, and then how much of it is the pressure to exist to the standards of what white people have said we should exist to. Um, and fighting against that and like, well, Alicia can sound however the fuck she wants. What do you mean she doesn't sound Black enough or she sounds too white? And like, and then also Kristen and I also talk about that too, where like you get it from both ends. You get it from your Black friends sometimes, and then you get it from white people who feel bold enough to be like, I'm Blacker than you. And it's like,
what?
what? It's, you're as a Black person, I think constantly just swimming upstream in terms of settling in your identity and defining your identity.
And like that is something I'll have to absorb, is how much more exhausting it is just to do exactly the same things that I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like it's unfathomable, really, and it does make me feel a deep sense of shame and guilt. Not for like personal instances all the time,
Right.
but just generally for looking the way I look. Right, and that in itself is something that maybe we can maybe that is an identification thing for a white person. If you're feeling shame and guilt right now, we've made people feel that sense just for fucking existing, not for having to answer questions and be held accountable, just for existing, just for being human.
Yeah.
For being born.
I think what you're hitting on is that, yeah, it's like, I think that shame and guilt is actually useful, and I think that some people are taking that shame and guilt and they are responding in what I said earlier, which is that white urgency.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if I talked about this on the Black folks, but I have talked about reactive change versus systemic change. And you feel like people are doing things to feel better about their shame and their guilt.
Yes.
And so it's like quick fixes to dissipate that feeling of shame and guilt, as opposed to taking that shame and guilt and using it to be like, oh, if this is how I'm feeling, I can't even imagine what my neighbor, what my coworker, what my friend is feeling, and how do I use that to make sure that they don't have to feel that ever again.
Exactly.
To take it still has to come off of the white, like, it has to come off of the white person. It's not about you.
Totally.
You can't center yourself in this. It all has to be used to fuel the efforts to making Black Lives Matter, period.
I mean, I've done a lot of therapy over the years, and shame and guilt are always framed as very destructive things, and they are on a personal front. If you allow them to take over you and wallow in that, they are very destructive, and they're like a cancer.
Yeah.
The feelings that create the shame and guilt and the actions that have created the shame and guilt are the things that you need to focus on, right? And then it's like, how do I get better?
Yes.
How do I get better at being better?
Yes.
Because I don't want to feel shame and guilt. I want to feel like I'm a lover. I'm a lover, not a fighter. I want to love, and I want that love to be expressed in the best possible way. And I was naive enough, I think, before all of this, just to think that living the way that I lived and, doing the things that I do and being comfortable with that and like being nice and kind to people, like that was enough. And I think I said that to you when we
first started. Yeah.
It unfortunately, it isn't, because not everyone's like that.
Yes.
And that's what it comes down to.
Yes.
So being nice and kind and all those things, yes, please do that. But now be active as well.
Yes.
Because I'm really lazy. And I'm doing a lot more than I used to.
Yeah. Which is important. It's important. The active part is we can no longer afford people. I think that's why we're here, right? That's why we're in this moment, because of people being passive and allowing.
That's also why we're going to keep doing this, Brendan.
Yes, we're going to keep doing this until it changes.
No, and just until. There's nothing more fascinating than listening to someone tell their story. Right? And I don't think there's many white people out there who really have had a lot of time listening to two Black people talk about their experiences.
Yes.
And really absorbed what it is to feel the things that you feel, or not even like they're never going to feel the things you felt, but at least a knowledge, an insight into just getting out of your own way and your own world that you've grown up in, and just understanding.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I wanted to do this, because I feel like I've watched a lot of white people talk to each other over the years. So I do think that there is something important about just as one of the parts of your being active, like listening and absorbing Black experiences from the mouths of Black people.
Yeah.
Be that these conversations, be that watching Insecure, for example, which is run and led by an entire Black team or a mostly Black team. However it is that you want to take those experiences in, but really making sure that it's filtered through Black people, so that you're getting something authentic and organic, as opposed to the idea. The idea is, say that again?
A recounting of someone's, this is what I believe they're asking for.
Yes, which I'm done with that. Wait, so I wanted to also bring up, because I know we were talking about Mila Jam and I talking about parenting, and you had some takeaways for that. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, and like I didn't know Mila before that conversation, but I texted her straight afterwards and like, we have to meet. I think you're fucking. Like all of your guests were fantastic, like just brilliant. Apart from that guy, that DB guy, not too sure.
That DB guy, man.
David Bryan. Yeah, it was really interesting because obviously there are various things that you connect with personally, and then there's a lot of things that I'm hearing for the first time and experiencing for the first time in these talks. But one of the things I really connected with and made me think a lot about was when Mila was talking about parenting and what her parents did for her and the love of her mum.
Yeah.
And I guess the bigger picture of what it is to be a parent, and when you guys got into that, and the notion that it's not your job as a parent to get your child to I can't remember how it's expressed properly.
I think we were talking,
help children find out who they are.
Yes.
Not what they are.
Yes.
That's what it was. And I was like, that sounds really simple, but as a parent, it isn't.
Yeah.
As a parent, you can't get out your own way with like, this is what I want. This is what I think is best. This is what this is what that. And it comes from a place of protectiveness, yes. But when it comes to hampering someone's own ability to grow themselves,
yeah,
then it's not great. But it's systemic amongst all parents, in all classes, in all colors, in all ethnicities, I think, and it wasn't like the sole purpose of what these talks are about, but it is something I certainly took away from it. And I think it's really important that
yeah.
I don't know why it shook me so much, but I think it's just, it goes to the core of like who we are as people, I suppose, and our thing about what's right and what's wrong. And the notion that like finding out that your child is something that you didn't think they were going to be, and something that you've never given much time to or thought about before, and you're now faced with the challenge of having to love someone like that,
right,
and be okay with it, that's what it is to be a parent.
Well, it goes to, I think what, and I don't know, I'm not going to speak for you, but I feel like what shook me about that, two things. One is because, we're framing that conversation in race, but then you kind of understand that parents are parents across all races and ethnicities and cultures. And so there's that humanity connection that we have. But then the other piece of it being, since you are a father, this idea of, I think it brings to the forefront what unconditional love actually is. Do you know? I think that as parents, or the concept of parenting is that the love is unconditional. And I think what Mila and I were talking about is that there are times, not necessarily in our lives, but in especially coming out, her as trans, me as queer, where there becomes conditions around the love, right? And parents having to address why the love becomes conditional. And is it conditional because the child is not doing what you wanted them to do, what you thought they should be, or how you thought they should be? And maybe you don't intend for the love to become conditional, but it does, right? The relationship starts to, oftentimes, and I can speak as just a Black queer person, oftentimes those relationships become stressed because the love now goes from unconditional to conditional, because as the child, I'm now defining myself and I'm now defining my identity, and that's not agreeing with my parents' version. And it's just not something I think parents think about until it happens, right?
Absolutely. Until like your children inevitably grow into their own unique beings.
Yes.
And I think that, another thing that came, another sense of shame, I guess, that I felt when I was watching the conversation with Mila. I've never really properly given heed and made a point of trying to understand what it is to identify in a different way to everybody else.
Yeah.
Right. And I've always been like, yeah, of course I'm cool about everything.
Yeah.
But am I? Am I
Right.
really? Am I really cool about that? Do I still have little like judgy voices in my head going, well, yeah, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that was the voice in my head.
Yeah.
After that conversation, it no longer is.
Yeah.
Like I really sort of gave myself a talking to, and I felt again a deep sense of like, wow, that's really interesting that you thought you were really cool and stuff, but actually you were judgmental.
Yeah.
You were judgy. And the challenge that comes out of your own insecurities and your own not being completely okay with yourself.
Yeah.
And that really hit me, because I was like that. I was having that moment as I was watching it.
Right. Yes.
I was like,
Well, it's like that moment where you're like, oh, I think like a lot of people too, like, especially this is why this global awakening has happened, where everyone's like, I had no idea, Brandon, that you experience this. But it's like, you were never curious enough. You kind of thought that like, oh, I'm good. Like, I'm liberal. I get it. If anything comes my way, I support it, whatever. Like, and then when you're, say it again.
That's white privilege again.
Yes.
It all kicks into the same thing.
Yes.
Sorry, but I'd
No, you're fine. And then, so like, now it's about like, I keep saying, in the quietest part of your soul, you have to ask those difficult questions. It's the only way to move forward. It's the only way to change anything. It's the only way to address it.
Yeah. Well, it's like if you again, going back to therapy, but if you go to therapy, there's no point going to therapy unless you don't tell the therapist everything.
Right.
You'd be fucking surprised how many people go to therapy and still try to kind of tailor the truth a little bit.
Yes.
Kind of still paint them in a good light and let them off the hook a little bit.
That's a beautiful analogy.
And it's like, we've got to be our own therapists in this moment. And like, when we talk about honesty, we've got to be really honest.
Yeah.
And that's, again, something that I'm dealing with in other parts of my life at the moment, but it's like accountability.
Yeah.
You can't hold people accountable if they're not truly holding themselves accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And it all comes down to that. And when we talk about holding yourself accountable, it's not like, oh yeah, I take ownership of that. You can't just say I take ownership of it.
Yes.
You have to take ownership of it and truly understand what ownership of that means and how you improve.
Yeah. You have to understand, or you have to go on the journey to understand what the thing is and why it even exists to begin with. You know, it's like, where is it coming from to begin with, so that you can actually break the cycle, so that you don't pass that on to the people that you're around, and so that you can, as you say, show up better, be better, do better. You just can't be better at this thing called being a human if you're not engaged, if you're not asking the really challenging questions about how you were raised and where you were raised, and what beliefs, what unconscious beliefs and biases you have. And I think we all have them. And if we were to say them out loud in a public square, we'd be embarrassed by some of them, hopefully. But the deal is that now that you know, you can engage with it, you can process it, and you can do something better. You can expand your humanity, right?
Yeah, and essentially that's at the heart of all of this. That's what we white folk have to do, is expand humanity.
Yes.
And humanity being the really important word here.
And some of y'all have to step into your humanity. Some of y'all need to step into it.
That's, another thing that I wanted to talk to you about is that, you know, when you were talking to Kristen about church, and obviously I don't know if a lot of people know this about me, but like I grew up in the church.
Mm.
You and I have obviously talked about
Yeah.
this. You know, I grew up in the Baptist church in the UK, which is not kind of like the Southern Baptist denomination.
I would imagine that it's not.
More,
Like,
more of a, like, as you like to say, la la la, yeah,
yeah.
like singing joyful songs about being praising and joyful in the most boring way.
Mundane.
Nothing going on. Hallelujah.
Oh.
That was kind of church ago, but I mock it in that sense. But like, I think I consoled myself as I was growing up, or allowed myself the knowledge that I grew up in the church was a good thing, right? And so I'm only coming from a good place.
Mm.
And as an adult, I've kind of taken a step away from the church, partly because I found the notion of organized religion a bit much. I found it kind of often did the opposite of what it was meant to, and it ostracized as opposed to embraced and made people feel loved, you know.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, that was something that I guess took for granted. I guess if you went to church, you're a good person.
Mm.
Well, newsflash, you might be a good person in the grand scheme of things, but are you really a good person?
Yeah.
You might say that you believe in God and all, and you might have a connection with God, or you have a personal relationship with God, but the God that I understand that we learned about when I went to church was a God that was accepting of everybody because everybody was flawed.
Yeah.
Now, somewhere in the sort of like
Somewhere along the way.
over the years, that seems to have been lost somewhat, and it becomes quite a sort of a place of didactic teaching, and this is how it is, and if you don't think like this,
Yeah.
you
For
know.
some churches, you know, and I know it's not across the board, but there are a lot of us that have some trauma inside of the church because, and again, not all churches, but there are churches and places where, yeah, it goes from what's supposed to be a love and openness to you can't do this, you have to do that, and a lot of shame and a lot of
Amazing.
constricting.
Isn't it amazing? It's the same as parenting. Like, God is our Father, and it's
Yes.
unconditional love, yet it houses a place full of conditions.
Oof. Yes. Yes. Accurate.
And, you know, that is, and I don't believe that God is like that.
Hmm.
And
Nor
we're
do
going to have
I.
a bigger conversation about God, but like, I think that is human. That is humanity. We do that to ourselves.
Yeah.
The weirdest thing about doing the show Lucifer was like, everyone's like, oh, it's a show about the devil and all that. And I'm like, actually, it's a show about accountability. It's a show about the devil being bored and being blamed for everyone else's fuck ups.
Yeah.
You need to hold a mirror up to yourself and take a look at yourself, because only you have done this.
Yeah.
Right. And that is that accountability thing. I can tie it into, you know, what's happening now in my life. And I hope what I can encourage other people to do.
Yeah. Wait, since we're on the topic of Lucifer, you know, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Sorry.
we are. We are. We are on the topic of Lucifer. So DB, who is obviously your co-star and brother and friend,
I love him so much.
he's the best. So were there any was there anything new that you learned from that conversation, or any what were your takeaways from that
I
conversation?
mean, my experience of DB is he's a very introverted, quiet, contemplative, kind human, right?
Yeah.
But when he talked about his simmering rage,
Mm.
and then it broke my heart actually when he talked about his PTSD coming out. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I love him so much. And just knowing that he had all this stuff inside of him, and he'd taken it upon himself to sit on it.
Mm.
And again, going back to something that Alicia said, it's like within the Black community, there doesn't feel like a lot of places that people can go and check in and say, what about me?
Yeah.
You know, I've mentioned therapy a few times on here.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that, like, as a Brit, is not a normal thing, I have to say. But certainly coming to America and white America and Hollywood and all that, it's cool to have a therapist.
Yes. Yes.
Not like, what's wrong with you? Why are you going to therapy?
Yes.
But to know that, like, he'd sat, you know, and DB's progressive, like he said, and he'd sat in therapy for 20 years and he'd never brought up the issue of race in therapy.
Yeah.
And at the heart of it all, he realized when all this stuff had been happening, and he was numb, because you guys have had to numb yourselves,
Yes.
sensitize yourselves, that it suddenly hit him all in one go on one day. And for me, like, that's my friend and my brother. That broke my heart hearing that.
Yeah.
And it broke my heart that it's a pandemic and I can't fucking go and hug him.
Yeah. That's what makes this whole thing even.
It does. It
more
does. But it
intense.
also is forcing us to talk and not just kind of like get out of jail free and just hold
That's
each
true. That's
you know,
true.
it's a currency for me to hold and hug, and like, and you know, that is a way I express myself. It's and maybe that's kept me out of a lot of awkward conversations in the past.
Wow.
That's kind of this again. These circumstances have forced this conversation, and I don't think I've ever heard that from DB.
Yeah.
I worked with him for 6 years, and I'm sure, you know, we'll be friends for the rest of our lives. But if this moment hadn't happened, I don't know if I'd have ever heard that from him. And I don't think I've ever asked that of him, because I wouldn't have thought to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that thing of, I mean, this is what kind of, I had a friend say this to me where she was like, I just didn't think it was happening to you. Like, I knew it was happening somewhere inside of me. I knew it was happening, but I just didn't think it was happening to you. And I found that so interesting because it's like, oh, wow, like Black people are amazing actors. Like, you know, like, we're phenomenal. Cast us in everything. Why don't we have Oscars everywhere? But like, on a serious note, it's like, oh yeah, because we really, you know, compartmentalize our experiences in a way that allows our white friends, like the people who are close to us that are white, to think that we're fine and that what's happening in a different state or across the country or down the block has nothing to do with us because we are, I don't know, the exception to the rule, or it's different for us, or something. But we've like, there's this narrative that because we don't talk about it, that like we as I'll say, me as a Black person has engaged in, and then my white friends have a narrative that they've engaged in, and there's no bridge, um, there's no confirming or denying whether
But
or not there's truth.
do you think that ties in as well to you, like, for you personally, you're saying you have to adopt this kind of thing to be in white spaces?
Mm-hmm.
You have to code switch and you have to do all these things to be in white spaces. That's just something that comes out of that, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I'm this is the I'm gonna ask you a question, but I'm gonna say this thing about DB. So DB was the second conversation that I had, and I asked him the question, like, when was the first time you got followed? Which was, to me, like, for me, kind of like, oh, I wasn't sure if he had ever been followed, and so it was like an experiment for me where I was like, I don't know, is this a universal? I know it's a universal thing, but is it not? But he had a story right away, and I was like, fuck, this is like that.
Isn't that incredible that you can make that assumption?
Yeah.
Because I thought that, I actually had that thought when I was watching over it again today, the one you did with DB.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was like, because there was no preamble to that. There was no like
No.
question. There's none of that. So to go in and just say that assumptive question, again, it's like, if we hadn't been having these talks, I would never have thought that. I'd
Yeah.
never have thought, like, you know, I just would never have thought it.
Yeah.
But it's as simple as that. You don't. It's things we don't have to think about.
Yeah, the privilege.
That's the biggest kind of takeaway from all of these conversations. For me, is like so many things that I've never had to think about.
Mm.
So when I'm feeling fucking hard done by or something about situations, I take a bigger breath now. I take a bigger breath and go, hold on, really, how hard done by are you?
Mm.
No, and the truth is, not very at all, compared
Mm.
to a lot of people who've done nothing but sheerly, but exist.
Yeah. Who are trying to exist.
Trying to exist,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Whew. Well, this was great. Wait, say that again?
All sweaty and everything.
I know, I'm sweaty too. I got my fan. You can't see it, but
Well,
well,
I'm so happy that you've done these, and I'm obviously imploring you to do more. Like, the space is open for you as long as you want to keep doing this, because I want you to keep doing it. I think it's really, really important, and it's really entertaining and engaging.
thank you.
That's the other thing, mate. It's like watching you flourish in this and have some catharsis. I would hope
Yes.
having these experiences and these talks. Yeah,
Well, I
it's
would love to keep doing them because they
gotcha.
have been.
It is happening.
It's happening. It's happening.
That, folks, is continuing on my page, on Brandon's page.
Yes. Yes.
And
It's been cathartic and nourishing and healing for me. And every time, I end the recording, like me and the guest always have like this, wow, like, because you just don't, as Alicia said in that first episode, we don't have a lot of spaces to
Yeah.
check in on each other like this. And so it's felt like in this little small corner of the internet that I'm occupying, that I'm able to create that space for me and my guests. And hopefully, the Black folks watching are getting that same nourishment or bits of that, while the white and non-Black people are getting just information to expand into that humanity a little more.
information, as opposed to the information we preoccupy ourselves with on a daily basis all the time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
I know we're putting this out on a social media platform, but like, these things are an hour long.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really a social media format.
Yes.
And snapshotting and be getting bored and like flicking through and, well, that was happening over here. It's like, I implore people to kind of spend, like, what I've done with these is when you've sent them to me, I've watched them and I've listened to them like a podcast. And
Yes.
it plays that way. And it's, it's just so worth putting the time in.
Yeah.
It really is.
I'm so grateful for you letting me use your platform to do this. I'm also grateful that you're listening, you're watching, and I'm grateful for this chance to have a little bridge moment to check in with each other. We love a bridge. We love a bridge.
No, I'm glad as well, man. And like, I just, I just want as many people to listen to this as possible. But I hope maybe we've inspired some people that might want to be guests as well.
Yes.
To contact you and do that, because it's compelling for me. It's really compelling listening to these stories. And yeah, it's a good way of starting some kind of healing process, but it's the very start of it.
It's the very start, y'all.
Oh, I thought if you take the Band-Aid off now, it really isn't.
It's been 2 months. We're done, right? No.
We're still gently taking the fucking bits of grit out of it. We then put the antiseptic on. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right.
It's a process.
It's a process.
It's a process. Well, thank you, Tom. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, mate. Love you lots.
Yeah, love you.